All right, hello to those who have recently joined us. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes on our program by Will Moncayo on space and surroundings. We're just allowing a couple more minutes to pass through at exactly 5:05. So I'm going to hand it off to our artist guide, Laura Pacini.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final Artist Guide-led online program series titled Opening the Cabinet. My name is Laura Pacini, and I am an artist guide here at the David Ireland House at 500 Cap Street. I would like to thank you for attending and showing your interest and enthusiasm for this event. With this program, Opening the Cabinet, we hope to expand and explore the dialogue between the House and the Bay Area conceptual art movement with a series of cross-disciplinary performance lectures, talks, and readings centered around the House's new online publication known as The Cabinet, which can be found at 500capstreet.org. Organized and presented by the David Ireland's very own staff, our artist guides host a discussion each Wednesday evening from February 17th to March 10th, which is tonight from 5 until 6 p.m., Our free 4-part program draws inspiration from David Ireland's conceptual threads of isolation, protection, and wonder. Additionally, before we get started, I would like to draw your attention to our recently announced residency with Bay Area artist David Wilson. Over the next 4 months, Wilson will be exploring the archives and situating the house in context of the neighborhood through a series of scored walks and drawing exercises. His residency will conclude with an exhibition, public ephemeral installations, and a series of public programs in spring 2021. Stay tuned on this and other programs by following us along at 500capstreet.org and signing up for our newsletter. And so thank you to the team at the David Ireland House, Leon Ladia, our exhibitions and programs manager, Kate Malloy, our director, and our artist guides, Alex Amer, Bells Howard, Camille Messerly, Justin Nagel, Sam Carmel, Stephen Loskatoff, Will Moncayo, and myself, Laura Pacini. Thank you also to our board members, advisors, supporters, and viewers like you for adding to this evening's success. If you have the means to do so at this time, please consider making a donation. Your support is what helps keep us going. Tonight's program, Will Moncayo will talk about artists that utilize space and surroundings in diverse ways, including Ana Mendieta, Felipe Dulzares, Bruce Nauman, and David Ireland. Following the presentation, Moncayo will facilitate a brief dialogue on how space and surroundings pertain to artistic practice, inspiration, installation, and process. This program will include an analysis essay, then a facilitated discussion, finishing up with a public Q&A. Please leave your questions in the chat box. And it is with great pleasure to introduce you all to my wonderful colleague, Will Moncayo. Will is a visual artist and writer based in San Francisco, California. Moncayo received a BA in photography from San Francisco State University, has worked for various art institutions, and continues to do so as an artist guide at the David Ireland House. Will, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to quickly thank all of my peers for their exceptional programming thus far, and those working on upcoming programs. I cannot wait to see these projects. With that being said, I'll just dive right in. David Ireland, Bruce Nauman, Ana Mendieta, and Felipe Dulzares are all artists that may have overlapping themes and similar subject matter in their respective practices. Each has their own distinct voice and approach to experimenting and creating works that speak to their lived experiences and individual perspectives. Art historians often attempt to historicize these artists' works respectively within these categories and movements. But I'd implore all of you to look further into each artist's work and careers to get a better understanding of who they are as an artist. Sorry. With that being said, as an artist, I'm no stranger to contradictions. I understand that categorizing or placing these artists within the confines of certain labels, think earth art, think feminist art, even Bay Area conceptualism, helps us find these intertwined threads that can connect artists together and expand on the dialogue of these artists and their lasting legacies. I also understand that these artists in particular have completely deconstructed our understanding of these said categories, furthering the fluidity of their work, blurring the lines of classification, and ultimately creating artworks that are timeless. I hope, if anything, that this program will give those watching some insight and context into these talented artists and their impressions that they've made through the course of their careers. With that being said, let's start off with their very own David Ireland. So starting off with the life and work of David and his grand work, right, the piece of which I'm already inside of, 500 Cap Street. David Ireland was and still is a significant figure in the Bay Area conceptualist movement, of which came during a powder keg of a time, the 1960s and 1970s. Ireland, originally from Bellingham, Washington, first received his BFA at the California College of Arts and Crafts in 1953 in industrial design, leading Ireland to projects that centered restoration, from 500 Cap Street project to the Headland Center for the Arts. David Ireland's aesthetic at this time was evolving in various ways, from taking form in sculpture, performance, and prints, almost always using readily accessible materials and found objects. Ireland was both influenced and influenced his peers during his time in post-graduation from San Francisco Art Institute in 1974. Those peers being Howard Fried, Tony Labat, Tom Maroney, and Paul Koss, to name a few. In 1975, he found and purchased 500 Cap Street, proceeding to take on this process of what he fondly referred to as maintenance action. After years of stabilizing the space, David Ireland began to literally unearth the potential of this space by highlighting the history of the house over time, whilst subsequently leaving his mark. This is an exceptional example of how an artist is shaped and informed by their surroundings and their relationship to a specific space. Pardon me. Ireland is not only activating 500 Cap Street, he is also being mobilized by the space itself, ultimately coming to the realization that this space is also the work. Ireland's work is largely predicated by space and subsequent surroundings, as shown through his site-specific installations and collaborations. In Ireland's exhibition, Gallery Place, 1987, at the Walter and McBean Galleries at San Francisco Art Institute, Ireland disrupts the gallery space with an extravagant gesture of pouring concrete down a staircase, whilst giving a nod to Robert Smithson, Marcel Duchamp, and Paul Koss, all in one piece. This piece is Smithsonian Falls descending a staircase for Piquet. This overwhelming use of concrete, a material so quintessential to Ireland's practice. Here it spills downstairs and envelops the physical space. It's both forceful and subdued as it takes shape to the cement steps of the gallery, already at home as it hardens the stairs. This grandiose performative gesture with sculptural element is evocative of Ireland's other works. Think of his use of jars to preserve, to showcase work, but not at this scale and within this space. Another extravagant use of scale is his collaboration with artist and friend Anne Hamilton and their joint Walker Art Center exhibition, Anne Hamilton, David Ireland, 1992. Both Hamilton and Ireland were invited to exhibit. Initially, each was to take a separate gallery space, but quickly decided to work together to optimize the space. In both artist practices, they experiment and excel in their use of history, with this being no exception, drawing from Minneapolis's rich history with flower. During the installation of this exhibition, Ireland began making concrete molds of his body using snow in the surrounding area to create a natural imprint. As the concrete hardened around the melting snow, creating these ambiguous figures. He then concealed them within the mounds of flour left to be revealed within the rift on the floor. These amorphous figures, straight from Ireland himself, are concealed in plain sight, buried away within a cabinet of which Ireland pulled from the basement of the institution. Placing himself within a space that once housed valuable items in the past, now brought back to life by Ireland to display his concrete forms, on par with what should be collected and on view, a space within a space. Another piece wherein flower is used to alter or understand space is Flower Arrangements 1966 by Bruce Nauman. Nauman is another noteworthy artist who early on in his career pushed the boundaries of art making with his emphasis on process, exploring the tension between concealment and exposure, and his understanding of studio space is site-specific. Active in the Bay Area, not only as an instructor at San Francisco Art Institute during the mid to late 1960s, Nauman's work had intrigued many as it took on a slew of mediums and incorporated the use of his body as template. For the brief period of time Nauman was in the Bay Area, he quickly established himself, creating captivating works that spoke to his approach of, quote, "When you don't know what to do, then whatever it is you are doing at the time becomes the work," end quote. This quote brings to mind a lot of the work he fabricated, recorded, and performed within his studio while in San Francisco's Mission District. Nauman embarked on creating within the confines of his own space, often setting up parameters within his studio space. Flower Arrangements 1966 is a prime example of performance marked by documentation, as well as a physical manifestation of his actions with this set of 7 photographs chronicling this month-long process. Playing with size, texture, and shape solely using 2x4s, these minimal actions combined with this direct approach at capturing these mounds offers little to no insight of performance, only what is left behind. Here, Nauman's actions are largely unseen. We are left with the aftermath of movement, the traces of flower along these forms revealing small signs of his gestures at varying opacities. Bruce Nauman's studio became central for a majority of his video and performance pieces, from failing to levitate in the studio to dance or exercise on the perimeter of a square. His work championed the use of body as vehicle, communicating these concepts through improvisation and movement, influenced by the avant-garde dancers and performers of the time, such as Anna Halprin and Meredith Monk. Using his studio as the backdrop for these performances, Naumann limits himself to working within the frame of the camera itself, and depending on the video work, often veering in and out of frame, almost calling attention to the expansiveness of performance beyond video's boundaries. In Art Makeup, 1967, Naumann assumes the role of both subject and object as he personifies 4 different colors: white, pink, green, and black. By obscuring his body with paint embodying each color. Originally conceived for an exhibition on contemporary sculpture at SF MoMA, this work was rejected for not meeting the, quote, established medium requirements, end quote. But this rejection really emphasizes Naumann's practice of abstracting these established notions of classification. His work exists in a myriad of genre and style, but his rejection of these systems liberates Naumann's art practice, engaging with time, space, and the body. Bruce Naumann's early video work expanded the medium to incorporate not just performance documentation, but the abstracting of the performance, the human form, and our preconceived notions of what art is. This abstraction of performance and use of body as apparatus is also evocative in the work of Ana Mendieta. Although Mendieta was working outside of the Bay Area and California, her work was universal in its simple forms and use of nature. Utilizing minimal actions, unconventional materials, and brevity in her pieces, Mendieta took on heavy subjects like trauma and detachment through staging performances and connecting with her surroundings. Originally from Cuba, Mendieta and her sister came to the United States at the age of 12 through Operación Pedro Pan, or Operation Peter Pan. Not knowing what the United States will bring them, Mendieta was optimistic upon arrival, ready to take in this new chapter within her young life. Unfortunately, in addition to separation from their homeland and her family, Mendieta and her sister faced all too common issues as accompanied minors, from family, from bouncing through foster homes to experiencing abuse at their Catholic boarding school, all while trying to learn a new language. Mendieta found some pause as she began her studies at the University of Iowa with the creation of the Intermedia Department by German-American artist Hans Breeder. Mendieta, along with her studies in Mexican art, more broadly primitive art, began formulating her ethos and aesthetic as she reoriented herself to her surroundings. Already drawing on her connections to her own trauma and history, Mendieta sought to embody these experiences of gendered violence through her choices of blood as material, often performing nude and using sights of nature. Mendieta's Siluetas is probably the most shared and known of her art practice. Both through photographs and video, Mendieta explores the earth with her body as vessel, communicating via nature these larger themes found in her work: dislocation, passage of time, and spirituality. As Mendieta staged interventions at specific sites, she oscillated between appearance and absence, leaving impressions onto the earth, creating an ephemeral imprint that will recede into the original environment. These temporal impressions speak to the return to nature and explore the body's connection to earth, rather than what Mendieta claims is a, quote, brutalizing of nature, end quote, by other male artists working with land at the time. Mendieta, at one point in her career, began to pivot away from incorporating her body into her work and focused on the silhouette or impression in hopes of being more universally received. As Mendieta began to focus on the shapes or forms, she began creating works specifically for installation, turning objects from earth into sculptural pieces. Mendieta's use of form in these minimal earth-based abstractions, be it her performative video works, photographs, or objects, translate these larger themes of time and space into these ubiquitous artworks that transcend generations, both past and present. Lastly, although certainly not least, artist Felipe Dosales is originally from Cuba and was influenced early on by his father, a well-known jazz musician. Dosales began to explore his body in relation to performance while he was a member of an experimental theater troupe at the Instituto Superior de Arte in Havana, Cuba. Here is where Dosales began to understand and align his body into these precise movements and sounds, translating larger concepts and emotion into performance. After, quote, defecting from Cuba, end quote, to Rome, Italy in 1991, Dosales ultimately trekked to San Francisco, where he began studying at San Francisco Art Institute in the New Genres department. It is here in San Francisco that Dosales began to merge his previous experiments with performance into his artwork, the result being this poetic sensibility and approach to creating that was naturally improvisational. Being greatly influenced by his professors and peers, including Paul Koss, Tony Labat, and David Ireland, Dosales realized his connections and interests overlapped with the greater Bay Area conceptualist movement. While in San Francisco, Dosales created various works that engaged his surroundings throughout the city, from starting a dialogue with the foghorn to rolling an orange down the hilly streets of the city. Dosales experimented with his appearance in video work, often obscuring himself and at times being front and center. These ephemeral performances were not meant to outlast, but rather exist in the present, calling to the surroundings of which he is experiencing and engaging. Now, to speak on Dosales' Full Circle series, I will be reading an excerpt from my essay, which looks at this body of work as exhibited in There's No Such Thing as a Perfect Circle here at 500 Cap Street. This article can be found on the cabinet on the 500 Cap Street website. Using 4 elements to create each piece: graphite, nail, pencil, and metal rings. The linear process traces are evident in the graphite lines and shapes made on the wall. The metal rings, balanced on a pencil, cast distorted shadows, furthering abstraction. Using found circular forms and utilitarian objects to produce these fragile works, Dosales constructs these intimate pieces that capture various moments within the artist's life. Though the circles are not solely a representation of the artist, rather, these works contain the prospect of the self. The Full Circle series invites the viewer to imagine the context within and around the forms outside of the artist's return or narrative of return. Thus, the series as a whole acts as a group of geometric vessels subject to further interpretation and an intimate portrayal of the poignant crossroads within Dulzade's personal life. Communicating through the abstraction of the form, Dulzade departs from linguistic boundaries to highlight the universality of simplistic figures. These minimal ready-mades also emphasize the importance of space around the work due to the dimensionality of the pieces. In his Full Circle series, Dulzade uses these basic forms and shapes to communicate his larger personal attachment to the work, abstracting the self through these very base level circular shapes and then manipulating them further slightly with the pencils offering some extension off the gallery walls, bringing forth this careful attention to detail and leaning into the unpredictable nature of these fragile pieces. With a strong breeze or a slight shake of the walls, these pieces can quickly, quote, deactivate and risk losing the original configuration. And I just want to speak on, this program itself. After, ruminating this past year with Dulzade's Full Circle series, I just had this odd connection between, the space between the works and the surroundings of the work is what really stood out to me. At this time last year, right, we all collectively were in a state of flux. It felt unsure with imminent closure upon closure. In a sense, it felt like a boxing in, granted for the better part of our community. I couldn't shake this sense of entrapment. I began looking around my immediate surroundings and was trying to make sense of these spaces in terms of our lockdown, shelter-in-place context. As an artist, it was touch and go in terms of occupying myself with my creative practice. I found myself slowly losing motivation, slowly losing inspiration as weeks turned into months, as case numbers rose and decreased. Existential thoughts began clouding my mind throughout this past year and even till now. Is it worth making? Is it worth creating during these almost seemingly apocalyptic times? I am cautiously optimistic, to say the least, about the next steps onward. I'm looking forward to seeing what other artists are making and creating within these times, as well as what institutions, specifically art institutions, will be doing, with this inevitable shift, so to speak, within the past year. So that's really was the headspace, I guess, where I was when I thought about this past program, keeping it also very vague, so to speak, with the title.
Oh, this amazing, Will. Thank you very much for sharing all of that with you and diving deeper into these 4 artists. It sounds like the pandemic had something to do with your selection of them, and it would be great to hear more about why you chose them and if it was something of a natural kind of facilitation that happened for that.
Yeah, I know, like from the outside, I guess looking in, it almost is as I've been, just picking and choosing artists, right? But I was specifically thinking about this time that we often reference here at the house, which is, the Bay Area conceptualist movement, right? This time being, or this movement being, around the 60s and 70s here in San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area, I should say. And, just thinking about this time, I was reminded of Bruce Nauman's artwork. He's someone who a lot of folks use as a frame of reference. Someone's work who's evocative of California and arguably America as a whole. Although Nauman's work was largely, or his time here in the Bay Area was largely, rather short. He was here for about 5 years or so. But what he accomplished in that time here in the Bay Area, I find exceptional and phenomenal. His work, really stood out to me and is a constant reference point, when I think about courses and things like that. So naturally for me, I couldn't separate seeing David Ireland's work within the vein of Bruce Nauman's work, right? They had a similar ethos or approach to practice, their art practice, so to speak. The famous David Ireland quote being, "You can't make art by making art," right? And I quoted Nauman with him saying, when you don't know what to do, then whatever it is you are doing at the time becomes the work. Those are like oddly similar, frames of practice, and I couldn't really separate the two, so to speak, on a timeline, right? Nauman was here in the, mid 60s to late 60s, and then coming into Ireland, who was more active in the, mid to late 70s, or beginning to write with Cap Street. And then naturally, I included Felipe because of the way he spoke about his work in the exhibition this past year, and the way he spoke fondly about David. They were very close friends. David Ireland was teaching at San Francisco Art Institute at the time Felipe was getting his master's here. And so they were always like, exchanging ideas. And Felipe would also say that, David was someone who attended all of his exhibition openings, which I found like a huge sign of, support, right? And to hear from Felipe himself how David's work has subsequently affected and changed the way he looks at artwork and makes artwork, right? Mm-hmm. And then, another influence on him was also Ana Mendieta. They're both, Cuban-based artists who have a history with this feeling of detachment, so to speak. Mendieta leaving Cuba when she was 12, Felipe leaving Cuba in 1991, or defecting from Cuba, as he says. And so they have like a familiar sense of, leaving or being from somewhere that isn't really a specific place, so to speak. And, they explore similar themes, but I also believe that, I wanted to, bring in Ana Mendieta's work because, recently, recently, it's been like 5 years ago or so, right? But like of recent, her estate has been doing a lot of work with restoring her video works, right? Mendieta didn't necessarily think of her video works as works themselves, but like going on and kind of seeing how, the estate has been kind of restoring these films and seeing them in like this like wonderfully restored visions is kind of like, I don't know, important. And it brings light again to her practice, which is, largely silenced by a lot of male peers, so to speak. And I just think it's hard to not bring up the impact of Ana Mendieta's video works, because this is also a time, she was active during the time Nauman was also active, right? And people often credit him for making these strides in documentation of performance when her work was, so visceral. It was almost like quite different. They're both visceral works or video works, right, the ones I'm thinking of, so to speak. Right. But, I think it's also just important to bring up her artwork. And her artwork also, went through a slew of different mediums as well: performance, illustration, photography, and then closer to the end of her practice and her life was making objects. And it's just like, I don't know. I'm thinking about that in terms of just where she would have been as an artist now, what we would have seen.
Well, this is wonderful. So I'd love to just have you, because you're talking about, why you pick them, and it would be great. And we're getting into a lot of the space and so forth, but then the links between them. I mean, you start to getting into some of their specific art practices, and how you compare and contrasted them would be really interesting to hear a bit more on as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I really was reluctant, I'm not gonna lie, with comparing or contrasting these artists' works or practices, because when it really comes down to it, like all of these artists really had this denouncement of labels. They didn't, they kind of were working outside of what we normally categorize these artists in. So, I mentioned like with Mendieta, she disliked being labeled an earth artist. She didn't like being called a feminist artist or Latina artist even,
Right.
She even had work that pushed back against those labels. Like she, at one point early on was, had a man with facial hair, cut off his facial hair, put it on, she was subverting these labels and what we understand as categories, right? And Nauman as well, like he really pushed his ideas and theories to these extremes that, even then a lot of folks didn't understand, thinking more along the lines of the sculptural pieces, right?
It took me a while. I remember first going.
Yeah. I mean, his career has been, I feel like there are so many different facets, to say the least, about Nauman's career, right? Like I think about most folks know his work from like his neon pieces, right, at MoMA or something like that. But like he just like went in on different mediums and just continuously went in and like abstracted and pulled back the layers of what we think of as sculpture or think of as performance. And I could make like these definitive like connections, right? Like with San Francisco Art Institute. I mean, aside from Ana Mendieta, but most of the artists convened or were around the Bay Area at the time, or even material choices, right? Felipe also made a lot of works with neon and, or all these artists using public space or earth and nature, so to speak. But it's also just like a matter of the similarities in how they operate, right? Like they were kind of pivoting away, or like I said, had this denouncement of these categories and labels that are they're often, pitfalled against artists, and we're just almost like working within those confines, so to speak. But really, a lot of these artists, I'm thinking particularly of like Nauman, Mendieta, and Ireland, and Dels Artes, which is like they all really kind of, take in these histories and understandings, but then put their twist to it, right, so to speak, kind of learn, like they're putting like Nauman's art makeup, right? That was a sculptural piece. We don't think of that as sculpture, right?
Well, it's new genre. I mean, now it becomes our new genres,
New genres, right? Like that's that's like as a base, umbrella term, right? Covering this like area. But like even David's works, just it's so like I think about, working here with the David Ireland House, it's just like thinking about going in like in archiving certain pieces. It's like how do you begin to archive David's work when there's so many pieces that are just kind of things, so to speak, or he even had his own vernacular around his work, right? He
yes,
was
I have
just
a lot of flashcards that I had to learn before I gave tours of the house.
yeah, like it's just like he had his own way of viewing his work, much like these other artists, right? They have their own, or any artist really has their own way of viewing their artwork. It's a matter of kind of extracting and trying to communicate that to, or not communicating that, right, to greater public and viewers. So it's really just like, I also just kind of see it like aesthetically, right? And slight things like uses of red in people's works and things like that. I'm a visual person, so it's like, I don't know, I see those minute details and make the connections there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question from the audience which says, absolutely, David's work influenced so many young artists who came of age in the Bay Area and beyond. What are some other artists that were influenced by David, such as, Tony Labat, Felipe, and some of the other young artists currently?
I also just think about like his relationship with folks outside of being an artist, right? What we think of,
David.
Yeah, like just him being a good friend, like to folks, or a good teacher, right? Like he imparted his wisdom in so many different ways that are outside of just his artwork or his art making.
He showed up for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I think about in terms of like the legacy he led as just a person. He was like incredibly kind and funny, and was very, passionate about uplifting other folks and their art practices, right? Felipe talked about when he had to present his MFA thesis or whatever. He at one point invited David to come in and sit and observe or whatever, be in the audience, so to speak. And that was months ago, and then the date officially comes, right? And he's midway, in his spiel, so to speak. And David comes in, they're like, "Oh, your guest is here." And he's like, "A guest? I didn't invite anybody." Almost taken aback by the fact that, someone would show up and kind of be supportive for him. As far as others that I guess he's like subsequently influenced or informed, it's not that it's hard to pinpoint specific folks, right? Like I think about Tony Labat specifically, with his documentation of David, performing maintenance action on the house, whether it be by, taking off all the wallpaper or sanding the floors, etc. Even just the relationship he had with performers of the time, right? I think it's not, I mean, it's said a lot, but I think as someone who wasn't here during the 60s and 70s, right? But like this powder keg of a time, like the Take Music Center, Anna Halprin, and like the folks who were like heavily influenced by performance and dance, like that all spilled over to different facets in the Bay Area. And not to mention, like, I'm not even bringing up, Vietnam War or like feminist movements or LGBTQIA like movements, right? Like none of that, but that was all happening, interconnected,
Right. Well, this is wonderful. I'm just going to mention that Kate, our director, just brought up Amy Burke, who is going to be running a public education program with us and others, who asked the question, is also a local artist who was inspired by David Ireland. So we want to give a shout out to Amy. So I want to get back to what you were talking about. And you mentioned at the end of your program, the pandemic and COVID and how it affected you and your practice. So has it continued to affect your relationship with your surroundings?
It's really made me question a lot. I was someone who prior to COVID was, making, creating, shooting, and asking questions later. I'm predominantly a lens-based artist or photographer. So, shooting was like my thing, and, editing and whatever. But, this past year I've been experimenting with other mediums that, like painting, collage, and writing. Like I want to, in some shape, way, or form, have that that connectivity with my photographs. Like, can they all speak, in the same tone or have the same like rhythm, so to speak? Kind of having it be connected in my practice is what I've been really working on. And then early on, I'm just thinking, it's been almost a year to all of this happening, right? Early on, I was just really thinking about what little space I had and how I can use that space. I'm an artist who does not have a studio. So I was thinking, more along the lines of how can I, make my domestic space or just domestic sphere into like a hybrid workspace. And I think that's something that isn't lost on, any of us this past year, whether it's working from home or teaching from home, if you have like children or things like that, right? It's like everything's relegated back to within that space. And so it just really, made me think and be present within the immediate space I have. And I don't think I can really give a definitive answer, so to speak, just because this past year has been so much feeling, so much emotion, so many people we've lost. I want to give space and time to like really process this past year. I find it personally difficult to do so when we're kind of on the forward, thinking about pushing to, even early on when things were kind of, for parameters wise, right? Like, it's just like, let's open this business, let's do that. But it really wasn't, the focus wasn't on individual, safety and health, right? Or collective safety and health, I should say. It was more along the lines of let's get back on track. Well, and I'm still like trying to process all of it, really.
Well, Kate brings up an interesting question, which is, was doing any of the research for this program influenced your current art practice?
As an artist, it's really odd because early on, I'm thinking like undergraduate stuff, right? Like I really inserted myself into my work and then decided, at one point or another to pivot away from that and to have myself not be in the work. And what I found in researching and reading, about Bruce Nauman's work, Armin Vieta's work, is just like the power, your body has, the power that you can possess within these bodies of works, or what you choose to communicate with your body. And I say that in the sense of like, obscuring it or showing, like there's so many different levels. And I'm only really, coming to the realization that, like I can choose to insert myself again, so to speak, and like be more fluid with the work, or with the work that I want to create, at least. That's what's really stuck out to me.
Interesting. I could see that.
Yeah. And then, just this past year in general, like working here at the house this past year has been like a different pivot, obviously, like, and I also just I know you're a painter as well. Like, I want to know how that's affected, or maybe not affected, your practice at all this past year. How has that shifted, I guess, for you, Laura?
Great, thank you. Great question. I would say I lost my studio early on, so that made me go indoors. And when everything happened, I was very much like Henny Penny, thinking the sky was falling. And I was glued to the TV watching Andrew Cuomo daily. Just how is the day going to go? Will I get through it? Will I get through it? Can I leave my house? What's going on? And over time, as I think we all have, you adjust and you get used to it. And it was really, San Francisco's supervisor, Catherine Stephanie, kind of pulled me out of a lot of it by asking me to pull together a bunch of artists to paint a field hospital for the COVID surge, which luckily has not been used and may never be used, fingers crossed. But it enabled me and 11 other painters to go into a space that would conceivably house people that would not be allowed visitors due to the contagion of everything. And it was proven that artwork, because of these very expensive studies, have been done by hospitals and art institutions and educational institutions, really facilitates the healing in people. So we all sat down and said, okay, let's come up with some themes that will be helpful and healing and nurturing to people that will come into the spaces. And it was amazing because you could tell from, I mean, we had 95 spaces to do and we did them all. We actually finished cleaning everything up this past week, and we started painting in October, but the idea started in August. It changed the space. You walk into the space and it was a palpable feeling of artists and painters coming in with intention and in service to people they would never know, to help them through their process of healing from an operation or an illness or what have you. And I think that it's really, that really helped kind of snap me out of the self-centeredness of, oh my God, my life is over, which it's not. I'm very lucky. I've actually had one vaccine already. And I would also say just, you, Will, and Kate and Alex and all of the artist guides here and the house really bringing all of us together to start thinking about art, having our weekly meetings and each of us bringing different artists and movements and films or performances to the forefront of each other and then just discussing. And so it really allowed us to have a stronger community as well.
Yeah, I mean, in just hearing you speak about like that community aspect, right, of coming together collectively and working towards like a collective goal in the paintings of the field hospital there. I just think about like, this past year and what would have been like the many a times we would have convened, not just here at the house, but at other exhibitions, other performances and spaces. And, what we lost in not convening together and speaking on art or discussing, other things that are brought up to our different attentions. And it's just like, I really do. I think that's what I really missed this past year. It's just that type of collective convening and discussing. And, I think I can't imagine this past year without having been working here, because like you had said, Laura, like it's just learning from one another, bringing in different resources and readings. Even just thinking about the previous programs here at the house with Justin's meditations on the ceilings here at Cap Street, or Bells's, poetics of the space and how they described collective intimacy and touch, or Sam's speaking to like Soma galleries and what they're doing to their space that they're creating in the Soma, right? Like it's that type of work that everyone's doing, and then just like kind of bringing it into conversation with one another and working off of each other. It's that type of collective meeting that I miss so much this past year. But I mean, we're all pivoting online. We're all here now, right? So happy to see everyone here, and thank you for being here with us in this space.
So there are a couple more questions that are coming up. One is from Camille, our very own Camille, to you. In addition to collage and taking up new mediums such as painting and your insights, have you found your understanding of spaces and interacting with them? Let's see, it's moving. And of interacting them changed how you use a lens and how you engage with a camera, and what do you find yourself drawn to in regards to a subject or a scene?
God, that's a good question.
And I guess this is our last question because of our time. We're now at
yeah, time wise. Yeah. That's a really good question. I'm someone who, like, I never really considered myself like a painter or illustrator or something like that. Up until college, really, like I was like, I'm a photographer. That's it. Like until a professor of mine, Matt Lips, who used to teach at San Francisco State, had said that that's incredibly limiting to say that you're just a painter, to say that you're just a photographer. That's saying that you can't do anything else. And it's just like really coming into my own, personally speaking, of like saying that I'm an artist. Like there's like other things I want to do and like work on that exist outside of even physical manifestations, like a painting or a photograph. It's all in and around. But I will say that I do feel like painting specifically has gotten me to really just like it's therapeutic. Art is therapy. Like that's point blank. But like it really got me to like understand and feel how different brushstrokes are and things of that nature. I think of Monoha, which is this Japanese movement where they really kind of painting and, you know, art in general is just where it's just kind of like the focus on the feeling or the moment. And that's in a lot of ways like Arte Povera, which is very, I keep talking, but.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Will. I'm now going to pass everything. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I'm going to pass this off to our lead artist guide, Alex Amer. So thank you, Will, and here's Alex.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and for those who have continued to tune in every Wednesday, thank you so much for your support. I would love to announce a few other keynotes before we finish tonight's program. We are pleased to announce that we are partnering with Amy Burke and her City Studio project. Amy's actually one of the people who asked the questions tonight. So hi, Amy, it's nice to see you in the audience. This is our first in-person multi-part education series featuring workshops focusing with the kids from ages 12 to 17. We are also very excited to announce that we will be having a new exhibition May 1st featuring our resident artist, David Wilson, who has been working alongside us at 500 Cap Street. Along with this, we are hoping to open our doors once again during the month of April, and developing further public programming with the artist guides, such as a reading group, which might be coming to you guys in the next upcoming couple months, which will interlace with our current exhibition and programming. Please check in to subscribe for our newsletter and for more information and dates. And again, you can subscribe to our as any new information at 500capstreet.org, and more information about programmings and exhibitions at 500capstreet.org/programs or 500capstreet.org/exhibitions. And with that, I'd love to actually all request for you guys to turn on your mics and give a little goodbye. And it was lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, friends.
Good night.
Thank you for coming. And
Thank you very
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
I look forward to having further conversations with you.
Yes, Jane.
we do too.
Bye.
And seeing people at the house.
Yes.
Bye. Congratulations. Incredible program. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Laura. Thank you all.
Great job, y'all. Great job.
Thanks, Camille.
Bye.
Bye.